We're out on the Recruiting Roadshow brought to you by Greenhouse, where we're talking with talent acquisition leaders and recruiting operations professionals about the problems keeping us up at night. The next guest on the show is Katie Wagner. Katie came out to Denver to talk a little bit about what she calls problem-based recruiting. She operates a firm called Talent by Design Collective, and I appreciate her approach to recruiting as a product. In this conversation, we dive in a little bit about Katie's approach to designing each stage of the candidate journey and how Rec Ops involves it all. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Katie. Recruiting has taught me that the world is much smaller than we think. There's no one right way to hire. There's no recruiting emergency room. There's no recruiting jail. When I think about like this phrase that comes to mind, everyone wants to live in a village, but no one wants to be a villager. It's kind of like recruiting. It's like who can do the rinse and repeat, some of the muck work, who has the physiological priming to pick up a phone and call a stranger in 2026. I know we do a lot of phone screens with like Google Meets now, and that's an observation in my own recruiting. In like last year, it was a lot more Google Meet scheduling within business hours than it had ever been before. Like the previous 9 years was like a hardcore phone job. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm not on the phone as much for my job. I think it was early days of recruiting that cut my teeth in making the distance from like here to here on a wired phone in an office where we were scanning faxed paper resumes into a legacy HRIS. Like that level of understanding the work primed the system for understanding the output, because recruiting is very output focused. I think when we fast forward through a lot of this digital transformation through AI, we will see that recruiting is probably going to end up looking a lot more like the way executive search and traditional headhunting has, unless the technology catches up in some dramatic way that increases a ton of friction at the top of the funnel to reduce the number of applicants. Because right now I just see like the levees have broken and recruiters are out there with buckets trying to bail the water.
And it depends on like the stage of company you're at. Like, are you well known or not? Did you get funding recently? Do people know about you? If not, are you doing only outbound because you have zero inbound? And the tech stack will depend on that, which it always has. But now that efficiencies are in place, they can more strategically decide how they want to deal with it.
I remember my first job in recruiting was RC and employer brand, like hybrid role, dual role. And there was high recruiter attrition in the team. And so there was always like an open recruiter rec. And so after a year, my recruiting manager was like, can you help us out and like take on more work? And I started working full cycle recs and I wound up getting promoted. And I remember probably like a few months into that first year of full ownership as a recruiter with a high volume rec load, going into my manager's office and like complaining about, dry pipeline or whatever for a search. And I remember her advice was just like, hey, you asked to be a recruiter, go recruit. And to me, that definition of like a recruiter is somebody who goes out and finds the talent and consults with the hiring manager, creates a value proposition for that individual, curates the experience and the journey, and helps close. Like that is recruiting. But the most value added as a recruiter is, I think, at the very top of the funnel, is going out and getting people interested.
Now they're going to have time to do that. if they have the proper tooling in place too, to kind of eliminate, they have thousands of inbounds that they can't even get through. If you're able to like get some time back from some form of automation there with a human in the loop, but a recruiter is going to be a community builder. It's going to be much more on the branding side, on the community side, because they're not going to have to spend so much time just like reviewing resumes. And even depending on the type of recruiting, some of those phone screens might go away too, because we'll be either more focused on quality, or maybe you're doing like high volume frontline recruiting where it's an AI screen instead of a phone screen. They get that time back to do some of the like branding and community outreach. Boots on the ground may come back soon.
I'm excited by that. Like, I don't think a meetup goes out of style. There's an interesting dynamic there. And one of the best compliments I've ever received from a CEO, my hiring manager, was, how are these people in your orbit? Because it was quality of submits. When we think about bringing our top tier from our network to companies, I've actually observed a little bit of cautiousness from my recruiter friends, where I think some recruiters are tentative to submit or refer those first degree folks that maybe they've hired or placed in the past into certain companies based on the inside information they have around the culture, around the company stage. I think that's part of becoming more strategic, is understanding the culture and the fit, not necessarily the like time to submit. And that kind of works against a recruiter's favor when we think about balancing speed and quality.
I will never forget when I was at DoorDash, our head of talent, Matt Valentino, said, I really wanted to bring all these folks along with me. They were a great fit from where I came from, but they're not a great fit here. And so you have to take into consideration, what is the context of this company and the problems they're going to be solving. I mean, that goes into how do you recruit in general, but regardless if you know the person or not, like, they could be great somewhere else, but if you place them from that environment into a totally different environment with different problems, they may not be great at all. It just really depends on the context.
How do you operationalize that into the assessment process? How do you bake it in? Is it scorecard? Is it assessment? Is it competencies?
Everything's like at the beginning when you calibrate with a hiring manager. I always try and tell my team, even when we do like different workshops with TBD, it's define the problem first. How do you define the problem? And how do you like coach and guide the hiring manager for them to define the problem? Because they don't always know. They just know that they need headcount. They're like, I just need support. I don't have capacity. They could be doing a variety of things. And so like our job as a recruiter is to understand very deeply of what are the problems that you need to solve. And then let's like tailor those skills, experiences, competencies to that problem instead of here's a product manager, go hire for it. You know, like it's just so specific to that company and what they'll be doing in their first even 3 months, depending on where you're at, or in their first year, what's expected of them.
It makes me think of that phrase, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. But it's this idea of take the time up front, get that investment, double down on all of those curiosities to focus on like, what are the problems being solved? What is the historical context of hiring? What are the outcomes of the job description? What does performance look like? I think where we're headed is more granularity in those yield ratios, where a hiring manager is not going to talk to 15 or 20 people
No.
in the future. They're going to talk to 3 to 5
Yeah.
because we're going to have more data up front.
We'll be able to predict better. Some of these like predictive data is showing them like, okay, in your quality of hire surveys, you're now able to use the data that you've gathered over the past like year or longer and then predict like, is this going to be a good hire or not? And then you're also like seeing the recruiter role shift into some of that like people ops / HR areas because they're now tied to quality of hire. And so It's going to be interesting to see kind of maybe we start goaling recruiters more towards quality of hire, which at least in organizations that I've been part of has always been like a hot topic of, do we do like turnover rates in the first 90 days? Do we do quality of hire? Like, do we hold them accountable to that? Or is it the cutoff at the hire? You extended your offer, they accepted it, you marked them as hired, I'm done. But now I really think that we're going to be able to like hold recruiting teams more accountable to how they actually perform down the road so that we're hiring the right person.
The challenge I see with quality of hire first starts with a lack of universal definition. When I think about our business groups in other units, we've got sales, we've got customer success, we've got product, engineering, marketing, finance. All of those teams usually have a top line metric that if you caught the CEO at the coffee station and they asked anybody in your department, like, hey, what's our net retention? Or what is our percent to sales goal for the quarter? They should be able to report that, and the CEO gets the information in less than a minute, and they get on with their day. If you say quality of hire to a CEO, you're not gonna be able to explain that. And I've heard quality of hire since, like, it's been talked about for 12, 15 years. Like, I have blog posts when I first got into recruiting from 10 years ago talking about quality of hire, and, like, we haven't gotten there in 10 years. I would love to see an industry-wide rallying to define it, but the second reason is hiring manager confusion. If you're my hiring manager and I'm your recruiter, and we start talking about quality of hire, and your previous company defined it with one equation, our current company defines it with another, we are injecting confusion. And as a G&A department within a business, injecting confusion is not sound management. I love the idea of quality of hire. Did this person we brought in do a good job and exceed the expectations and deliver value? I think because it's been talked about, it gets weaponized because it can quickly be distilled into recruiter performance. Oh, well, like which recruiter processed that rec? That's an easy report to pull. It's missing so much context, but part of that is motivation. It's hard to understand the motivation of a candidate. I don't know if we assess that as well as we assess other things in the hiring process.
It kind of ties back to that like therapist topic of like, are we like getting to the nitty gritty of like, are they actually going to do what they're saying they're going to do? Can they do what they say they're going to do? There's ownership everywhere. It can't be like one single person that is responsible for quality of hire. I mean, you think about it too of like, yes, the candidate that you hired, but also you look at if you're actually calibrating up front, now that we have all these like interview intelligence tools that is actually capturing what you need to hire for from the very beginning, you tie your JD to that, you tie their goals and metrics to that post-hire, and then you look at the hiring manager and say, okay, you say that they are not performing. Are they actually doing what we hired them to do? And if not, why? Because in that case, maybe you didn't hire the right person for what they're actually doing. So there's this, collaboration that has to happen of we all need to be on the same page of what are we actually hiring for? Who do we need to hire to do that? And then post-hire performance, like recruiting and HR teams are gonna need to come together much more closely. I think that there has always been this dream of HR and recruiting partnering together to understand like post-hire performance. And we really just have to come together to determine together, like, what are we actually saying is a success or not? And then maybe some responsibilities and duties will change of who's doing what when it comes to onboarding, first 90 days, engagement, and then like tying that back to performance metrics down the road too. Be interesting.
When I think about the highest value work a recruiter can do, which is build a short list of high quality candidates ready to interview as fast as possible. That's the most impact a recruiter can have today. Know how to source, know how to build pipeline for a role that may not have a lot of candidates with digital profiles. When I think about keeping the highest value work in massive tectonic shift that's happening in the industry, I want recruiters to embrace the parts of the job that will allow them to have a future in this career path.
I think that's where I'm gonna add on a thing to be highest impact, becoming that talent advisor. For how many years have we been saying that recruiters should be this strategic advisor to the business, and you end up being this like service provider, right? I think now's our moment. I think it could be where they're going to have a future where instead of, processing these candidates, building pipeline as fast as possible, they're also going to be the ones where historically HR has been pretty involved in, coaching and advising, and they still should be. But I really think recruiters who are going to, outperform their peers now that they're getting some time back is they're going to be able to advise these hiring managers on things like org design, or if you're between two candidates and there are pros and cons to each, it should be a no-brainer that they're already advising on that. But like, let's think long term and let's go back to this like problem that you're trying to solve and help coach them and think about like, how should you think about your team? Who should you hire? When should you hire? Why? Do you even need to? A lot of times it might be that you don't need to. And I know that that's kind of scary for recruiters, but we're just going to have to kind of like rethink how we think about like the long-term success of the business and be able to coach and guide them to that. And it's going to, I think, turn out really great for them in the long run if they're able to do that.
And that comes from having experience. And that's why I'm curious about the future, the very near future of recruiting, where for the most part, it is an entry level ish type role. You can, you don't have to go to school to be a recruiter. You can be early in your career and do recruiting work. I saw a like junior recruiter slash sourcing role. I saw a recruiting coordinator role pop up recently, and I was really excited to see that this is like a true entry level opportunity, because we've talked a lot about those early career roles drying up. Because when you say things like talent advisor and this movement the industry has been talking about, it's largely been our peer group, this millennial generation of recruiters trying to earn that seat at the table, folks who have worked for very innovative companies and have grown quickly within tech in this very niche startup environment or in big tech where you get a lot of experience quickly. So I think about how do we develop that strategic and that advisor piece for earlier career folks? Because it's hard to walk into a hiring manager kickoff call and say, like, why are you hiring this role? Are you sure you need it? It's hard to say no, even when the hiring manager is a first time hiring manager and recruiters are often ICs. There is an invisible dynamic of power oftentimes because we call those people hiring managers and they are a people manager. And the recruiter that is advising them is an IC. So if they're in-house, there's almost this like invisible dynamic that because this person is in like a higher tier in the org chart on the paper.
I mean, that's another reason why I'm trying to build this community for those more junior recruiters where it's like, let's get you some development resources to kind of like guide you through like, how do you take these hard conversations with a founder? How do you, junior recruiter IC, coach a founder on how to run their own business? It's daunting. They need support. That's why things like this is great for them to be able to kind of like educate and provide resources so that they can get that development when they don't necessarily have it around them in-house.
When we think about the systems and the strain, the problems that we're facing, like where do you think teams are breaking the most right now?
All these new tools that are coming out, it's just, there's too much to decide from. And so I see it nonstop with our clients and then just like with the community that I know of different talent leaders of we're getting pressure from leadership to implement AI, to do more with less. We need to be able to have some strong point of view on AI and recruiting. So I'm just going to pick and choose these random tools that I think that their product is great. I would love for this problem to be solved in-house. But what they don't have the time to do a lot of times is determine like what is your actual bottleneck for your company and stage and size right now, and then determine what the tech stack is. And so now it's a thing where teams are just like doing all these free trials for different things and seeing what sticks, or they are, implementing this like random tech stack that don't all talk to each other and it's like totally over engineered now. Or some of, the like larger organizations I've seen where they are encouraging everybody to do their own building, which is great. I think that is necessary for recruiters to be able to learn how to build with AI. But a lot of times it can happen in silos to where, each individual recruiter is building their own solution, but they're not centralizing it to the team. And so now all of a sudden you have like all these 70% of the way built solutions that they did, but it's not talking to the other one. And so you don't have this like centralized process or data to be able to really move efficiently. And so all of a sudden you have way too many tools and you don't know how to backtrack because you've been growing with scale. And how do you unwind all of that is a huge problem right now. So there's a lot in the systems space, I think.
And where recruiters have tremendous value in the organization is the fact that we have so much data about our employees through the candidate lifecycle that can empower and enable hiring managers to activate that person's potential in better ways. The solution here is transcription. AI and interview transcription allows us to have more accountability for what is said and reported to be said in the interviews. Historically, recruiters don't have insight into what happens after the hiring manager handoff. We just trust that whatever's on the scorecard or reported back in a debrief or retro is to be true.
Or like don't know how to push back on the hiring manager when they say like this very generic piece of feedback in the debrief and you're trying to get to like the root of it. Now you don't really have to do that as much and it's not as daunting because you can just go back, prep before the debrief and say like, here's what I saw as a theme in, your interviews, or you said this in your scorecard, but I actually didn't see that in the interview itself. So give me a little bit more information as to like why you're making this decision.
And this is where I position recruiters as the hero. So when I think about what you just described, it's treating recruiting as a product, having iterative improvement, having a continuous feedback loop, having a commitment to debriefs, retrospectives, check-ins, all of this stuff from a recruiting lens. If I'm like a director of recruiting, head of recruiting, VP of recruiting, running these sessions every quarter, biannually, what they really are is training sessions. And I think the more training, the more feedback, the more advisement coming from the recruiting seat will allow recruiting to leapfrog, and maybe we'll see more CHROs, chief people officers coming from a talent track versus the traditional HR track. Because vicariously through this work, we are doing and flexing the muscles of training, development, advisement, managing conflict within an organization, and driving towards a shared outcome, which is delivering folks that are going to bring value to the company through the work they do.
I really hope that we start to see more folks from talent and HR become chief of staff, COO, co-founders, because, really like we are kind of driving the entire organization on how they operate.
When I think about metrics at a macro level around quality of hire, I want to see revenue per employee be spoken about more than quality of hire. I think that is the true marker of accountability because it allows a recruiter to be rewarded for saying no to headcount, pushing back when there may not necessarily be a need for that role, which internally can allow people to flourish and develop more skills, take on more projects, and grow their career of the employee base that's existing. But revenue per employee is also this kind of subtle flex that's happening around SF. You have people talking about reducing headcount, you have people talking about token cost, and you have this idea of the billion-dollar company operated by one person. So I think it aligns recruiting and HR with what the greater organization and stakeholders value, which is like headcount minimalism.
Absolutely, we need a seat at the table when it comes to revenue forecasting. Even when you're talking about goal setting, like talent has to have a seat at the table there to understand like what can we actually do with a reduced number of headcount, or if you need to drastically increase your headcount, and are we sticking to that revenue per employee number or goal that we set aside to do?
What do you think are the metrics that matter for recruiters right now, today?
This has not changed for me in several years, but pass-through rates. You look by stage, the lowest pass-through rate is going to be your problem area, and that's where you diagnose and course correct. That's where you can also use interview intelligence now to say your lowest pass-through rate is here. Like, what is actually happening in the interviews? And are there any themes with candidates that you're declining? And then take that conversation with the hiring manager. Honestly, pass-through rates. It's the funnel data. That's going to tell you if you're on track or off track. It's going to help you diagnose the root issue and move faster, slow down to speed up.
I also think it's the easiest place to operationalize with a service level agreement. There's nothing better for accountability than documenting what your commitments to the organization and hiring manager are. So defining, hey, we're going to have at each stage of the candidate funnel a goal of this percentage being our pass through rate. And for each rec, you can have the context around it. I think anybody can just draw the funnel and then execute. That is, to me, the ability to open a rec, step on the field, do the job.
Yes. And so many recruiters don't realize like how to look at your funnel in that way. It's something that is so high leverage that you could do today as long as you're keeping everything up to date in the system and keeping it clean. But it's like if you're having problem areas that are being escalated and you're, trying to figure out, I don't know what the issue is. I don't know why this is super low and I'm being asked questions from my hiring managers, but I don't know what to say. Like, go there today, look at your pass-through rates, look at what the lowest is, and then dig into that.
And this is where I think human judgment can outperform technology. Like, we can do recruiting on a napkin. We can do a recruiting funnel on a piece of paper with a pen and a phone and an email provider and some data enrichment. And that's why I like it, because then it's like a craft. Like, it doesn't change from a first principles thinking. We just want to get to a handshake yes. Can I get to a handshake yes better than my personal competitor? When I go into an intake meeting, I want to know if a hiring manager is ready to hire, especially if this is a first time partnering. I want to know their sentiment around hiring. I want to know historically what their experience with recruiters has looked like. How do you know if a hiring team is ready to hire?
If they can define the problem or not. I know I sound like a broken record on that, but it's true. Like, if you can't say what the problem is that the person that you're going to hire is going to be solving for, there's no way you're ready to hire. What are you going to do? If you found the perfect candidate today, you had the intake meeting and you just happened to have a candidate that was perfect to them and you hired them, but you don't know what they're going to be solving in their day-to-day, how is that the perfect hire? How are they going to be ready to hire that person if they don't know what they're going to be doing? They can't support them on their journey. Or even worse, they thought that it was going to be one thing and day one they show up and it's something totally different.
I know I made the case for analog recruiting to simplify the value and the craft of this work. I am recruiting tech obsessed. I've worked exclusively within this industry for the last few years. I worked in-house on an ethical AI hiring product. I love emerging tools. We talked a little bit about things like AI interviewing, How are you thinking about AI freeing up time for recruiters, and what should they be focused on now that they have more value add activities in their day?
I think back to a decade ago when there's this pipe dream of hiring managers being like, I want you to like build me this proactive pipeline. And all these recruiting teams are like, yeah, totally. We'll build this like proactive pipeline. And then you're drowning in phone screens and inbound applications and who don't even think about like outbound sourcing, who had time for that. But now you do. So now you can spend that time nurturing candidates, building this community, supporting your employer brand, advising your hiring leaders, where like before it was very tactical, touch base. Now it's like, let's actually talk about your organization. Let's think about this in a little bit more of a thoughtful way. There are a lot of different places that we'll be leaning into that we have had this blue sky dream of being able to do that in the past. And we've never been able to, but now we can.
I love that. And when I think about some of the tooling like top of funnel AI interviewing, I'm really excited by this because we've seen this before. We saw this with one-way video interviewing where maybe it's frontline roles, maybe it's high volume client facing roles like customer success or SDRs. I remember implementing some of this type of tooling 7, 8 years ago, and it did a couple of things. It allowed recruiters to move a little bit more quickly, move and operate outside of traditional business hours. Like, it was very real for me sitting on the couch at 10 p.m., watching 50 interviews at 2x speed to get my shortlist and submitted outside of business hours. And during business hours, I was working other recs, conducting in-person interviews, having meetings with hiring managers. I was doing more with less because of video interviewing. The second side of that is what it did for candidates. When you can interview from your own home on your own time with 1 or 2 takes, you don't have to take time off work. You don't have to lie to your boss about being sick or use a PTO day to go interview. You don't have to take cash out of your pocket. It empowered candidates, especially where the money mattered. If you're working a frontline job, if you're working a call center job, many of those folks are living paycheck to paycheck. And it empowers candidates to bring their best self to the interview process. I actually see AI interviewing in a very similar light. It's allowing more people to present their skills and deliver recruiting teams with an opportunity to truly leverage skills-based hiring.
I mean, I'm biased because I come from high volume recruiting as my background, frontline recruiting, call center recruiting. I think it's going to be a game changer. I mean, you think about the role of a high volume recruiter where they are spending their days doing 20 interviews a day for the same role, and it is so repetitive. And it's either like you love it or you hate it. It's such a high turnover job for high volume recruiters. And so now you can just automate that and then spend your time doing boots on the ground recruiting for these frontline roles. I don't know. I shouldn't say this, but I think that it is going to be geared more towards like high volume compared to like, obviously, like exec search is a human, very like high touch need where maybe some like other tooling is more beneficial for that. But for high volume specifically, these AI interviewers, I have also implemented this like one-way video. Now, when it's you can just talk to somebody, there are other things you need to think about though before you just like implement it. You have to think through all this fraud stuff that's happening right now, deep fakes. Like there are these tools that are now solving for that, which is great. But then also depending on the type of high volume recruiting for frontline, like if you're in a totally different country, you have to think about, for example, I had a team in the Philippines and we are hiring high volume call center customer service roles. And that specific town was nobody had Wi-Fi. Like you had to purchase Wi-Fi by the hour, and people didn't want to pay for that to apply to a job online or to like take a video interview or an AI interview. And so they preferred to just walk into the building to submit their application and do the interview on site there. And so there's all these like different things that you're going to have to think about for your particular company's situation and the country that you're recruiting in. Because while technology is great, there are folks out there that are not as privileged to be able to either, have that technology on hand and a smartphone to be able to do it, like just in time recruiting. But there are solutions around that. And thankfully, a lot of these recruiting tools that are building these solutions are like willing to work to build a solution for that too.
I love that you mentioned that. Candidate enablement, empathy is the core of recruiting. And when vendors build with that in mind, even simple things like having a candidate portal where you can see your submits across jobs in one place. I like to fast forward and think about like, what if candidates have an opportunity to have like their version of their career story where it's then packaged by the vendor and there is that like top of funnel alignment. If you were, say, looking for a specific job, you've got a skill set, you've got 2 to 4, 6, 8 years of experience. You're applying to jobs that your one-time story could shortlist you for. I think there's a future where that's how we get the data. And the vendors that are going to build like the V2 of the candidate portal, I think will really shake things up for how candidates feel seen, heard, valued, respected at that stage of their career. Because, like you mentioned, there's always going to be that element of exec search, director plus level positions are filled in a certain way. But just as there's high turnover and high volume recruiting, there's always a new wave of earlier career talent, and how vendors think about nurturing that talent pool will be the differentiation for, I think, a lot of procurement processes in a more diverse, higher market cap landscape. How do you think TA operations teams are building today versus how they were building systems and processes maybe just a couple years ago?
There's the $1,000,000 question of, do we buy or build? And a couple years ago, build wasn't an option, and now it is. And there are a lot of folks trying to build. But what we're realizing is that it's actually a lot more. There's more involved with engineering time. It's more costly. You have to like keep it up to date on the back end and the front end anytime you make a process change. Whereas like if you just buy it off the shelf from a vendor who's already building a solution for that, it's just so much easier. And now there's this hybrid of, do you buy for some things and build on some things? Do you buy like one core ATS and build on top of that? Or do you have a hybrid of some, bought things on top of your ATS and then build on top? And so those are the decisions right now that I think people are having to make. And everybody's just so excited to build. But the reality is, it's just, they don't have time to. They don't have time to keep up with it. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Do you think people are distracted by building because it signals to their peers or signals to the internet or offers like a real sense of security of building a moat around their own career and professional relevancy?
Yes, to all the above. I think anybody that you talk to is like, I have to stay on top of it, in order to maintain like in this future of AI. Everybody's terrified. I mean, it's not just recruiting, it's anybody is terrified. Is AI going to replace my job? And I still don't believe that's the case today, but it is accurate if you don't stay up to date on how to build with AI that you're not going to be the one ahead. And so there's this, selfish aspect of it to like prove what you can do and teach yourself. But now we're a year into non-tech folks being able to build their own things and code their own things, vibe coding, and everybody is just having fun, I think, on top of it. And I think it's good to do that as like a side thing if you're wanting to teach yourself. I built this app like for folks who don't know astrology to be able to like tell me my astrology, like in layman's terms, because I don't know astrology, but I think that it makes sense. That's how I like played around with it. I mean, yes, building for recruiting, but I knew that that's going to take so much more time to be able to build something and then implement it and it be like perfectly engineered on the back end and the front end, and then maintaining that. So I just chose to build these like random apps that I thought were fun on the side. And I think that was probably a better use of my time for learning.
When all of this is said and done in life, why will recruiting have been enough for you?
The community. Honestly, it's like the connections that you make, because I just get this sense of joy of being able to help others with whatever their life situation is, or some of my closest friends are recruiters. So just the friends and the community.
Here's a look at the next episode of the Recruiting Roadshow, brought to you by Greenhouse.
We're out in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm about to sit down with Beth Marceau. Beth is a fractional talent acquisition leader who works with early stage startups. In this conversation, we talk a little bit about balancing the art and science of great recruitment.
You have to develop that flexibility. You have to develop that tenacity to stay on track with the consistency of sourcing. And I tell my clients and my hiring managers all the time that sourcing is not a fast result. It is going to take time.
Can AI and automation send better, more personalized emails that convert at the rate of a strong human recruiter?
Recruiting, and particularly sourcing, is like a little bit of luck mixed with a little bit of gut and a little bit of timing. And then there's some strategy on it too in the day-to-day.
To me, that's the crafts, the thrill of the hunt, being able to position our service as recruiters as the solution.
With sourcing in particular, it has to be personal. It really does. I try to bring my authentic self to everything that I do. I want to get to know them. I want to build that trust. I give candidates my cell phone number. Let's chat. I can be your career coach if you want. I can help you go through this decision.
If you do this long enough, if you have enough hustle, if you have enough heart, you can get to that outcome quickly. And that's what makes us invaluable.